Hello, and a very big 2-meter welcome to Thomas Colkinder's first ever webinar, The Future of the Office Culture. I'm your host, Yannick Green. It's a real privilege to have your ears today, so thank you very much for joining us. Today, I'm joined by 5 experts in the office industry, and I hope to bring you an engaging and insightful discussion focusing on the issues that matter most today in commercial property. As an executive search consultant, I'm lucky enough to talk to a number of senior individuals within the real estate organisations, and it's really apparent that they're increasingly concerned about the impact of the pandemic, bravely questioning the long-held assumptions about how work is done and the impact of having employees working away from the office for such a long period of time. Now, I know that many people out there have really enjoyed this new experience, but others, including myself, have been really fatigued by it. The productivity of some has increased, for others it has declined. The balance seems to be that most people would like to mix and match, but how is the big question. Can this be made to work when the occupier will be reluctant to pay for an underutilised office? So it's really clear that there's a great debate to be had. So without further ado, let me introduce you our panel today. So joining us from France is Aida Berrada. Aida is the Chief Operations Officer at GreenMe. Aida is both an entrepreneur and an engineer. She created GreenMe in 2014, and since then she's won several awards. GreenMe is the first connected service for measuring the quality of the working environment, including temperature, noise level, and air quality, and never has this been more important. The second of our panelists is Ben Almond. Ben is the Executive Director in the Corporate Capital Markets team at CBRE. Ben has recently joined CBRE from Pearson and has a wealth of occupier experience with over 16 years leading in the real estate world and workplace strategies for various global companies. His early career includes working in the investment banking and finance, capital markets, and derivative roles. Our third panelist, we're joined by Freddie Pritchard Smith, and he is the co-founder at Savvy and TX. Freddie is a PropTech guru. Not only does he have a decade of agency experience within the central London office market, but has recently created 2 very successful companies, Savvy and TX. The Savvy app collates occupational data to help companies make informed decisions about how best to utilise their office space, and the TX brand is the software that really blends interior design with the built environments to help occupiers with their decision making. Joining us from Helsinki is Dr. Peggie Rothe, Chief Insights and Research Officer at the Leaseman Index. Mitä kuuluu, Peggie? Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly with my limited Finnish knowledge.
Very good. I'm very impressed. Hello.
Good. Peggie is passionate about the modern ways of working and the strategic roles of the workplaces. As Chief Insights and Research Officer at the Leaseman, her role really includes leading the research undertaking on the world's largest independent workplace experience database and helping organisations understand the link between people and place. And finally, all the way from the west coast of the US of A is Zain Jaffer, PropTech VC, Bluefield Capital. Hey Zain, what time is it over there?
It's too early for me.
Zain is the founder and CEO of Zain Ventures. His family office actually invests in real estate as a part of its overall asset management. Bluefield Capital has $1.5 billion in real estate investments and recently launched a venture capital fund that invests in PropTech startups. Previously, Zain was the co-founder and CEO of Bungle, a mobile advertising company which was acquired by the Blackstone Group in 2019 for a lofty $780 million. Wow. So I'm really excited. What a fantastic panel we have here today. I'm going to start off by asking you all the same question to really set the scene. First of all, to Aida, I suppose, what was your first full-time office role? Where was it based? And how much had your own working environment changed between your first role and immediately before COVID?
I used to work in a trading room in Paris, in a bank in Paris. So this is where I knew I had to change my life. I spent a few years there, and then I decided to try my luck in the countryside. So here I am. Although I spend a lot of time traveling for work, before the COVID-19 crisis, of course, because now it's been almost a year since I've been traveling at all, working remotely, essentially, now.
Perfect. Peggie, same question to you, really. Where was your first role? Where was it based? And your working environment before COVID?
Yes, my first role was a real estate consultant over here in Helsinki many, many years ago. That's when I graduated from university, and worked with, just a fun fact, we, for example, LEED certifications. We were the ones who brought LEED certifications to the Nordics. So worked with quite a lot of interesting projects. My workplace before COVID was all over the world. I think in 2019, I had about 140 travel days. And now I've gone from 140 per year to 0. So I'm, silver lining, I guess, of this terrible situation is that I can actually go to the grocery store and buy heaps of fresh food and cook my own dinners. So that's
Sounds
me.
fantastic, yeah. Same to you, Zain.
When you ask an entrepreneur the question full-time, being an entrepreneur is much more than full-time, 24/7. It was also unpaid, obviously. So I was running my own company in a shady area in London. The office eventually got flooded. Long story there. Life prior to COVID, I was taking a break after selling my company, and I had this vision that I'd travel around the world. It's something everyone wants to do when they're in a career. One day they retire and travel. And COVID hit just as I was ready to start traveling. So just came out of retirement and started investing.
For same question to Ben.
Yeah, well, it may not surprise you. I've been 30 years at work, and the day I started, we had no computers. So that tells you how old I am. I started in audit, qualified at Ernst & Young. So spent a lot of time at clients, literally from boardrooms to cupboards, literally sitting on boxes. I remember that occasion when that actually happened. I then moved into investment banking. So I spent a lot of time, as Aida, on trading floors, open plan trading floors, very different environment there. And as you become more senior, they give you an office in those days. So I had an office on a trading floor and then offices off trading floors. And more recent, as I moved more away from investment banking into real estate, like remote open plan. But again, as I just said, traveling a lot, global international businesses, spending a lot of time traveling, working wherever it takes, hotels, in airports, planes, wherever it takes. So, my career has certainly learned absolutely work is definitely something I do, not a place I go to.
Perfect. And Freddie, as an entrepreneur as well, what was your kind of first time role? Where was it based, and how you worked before COVID?
Well, in fairness, my first time role was a graduate surveyor at a leasing practice, and we're fortunate enough to be on Savile Row, so I feel slightly smug with all in the grand scheme of things, if I'm honest. But moving away from the world of office lettings into entrepreneurship, I went from being in a small team to a big corporate that brought us out to actually running a team and feeling what real work feels like, which is 24/7. And especially when we had remote workers all over the place, the concept of a holiday was a lovely one. But as long as you had Wi-Fi, which everyone does, you're always contactable. But our working practice has always been pretty important to get people together in office design perspective. But online and Slack has definitely been a big part of my life over the last few years, to say the least.
Thanks very much. That's a great segue into our discussion topics. So the first of the discussion topic is who's the workplace for? So this is how we reconstruct how work is done, and what are the gains from really physically being in the office? The second is redesigning the workplace to support the organizational priorities. So this is really using smart data for office utilization. The third is what's the culture of the company in question? So it's the case of deciding, do people go to work, or does work go to people? And the last is how much and where space is required. This really means, will the office locations change in the future, and how will they be used to attract talent? Talking about, I suppose, who the workplace is for. So how should we reconstruct and how work is done? Personally, I think it allows me to carry out tasks unimpeded. It's got a clear distinction between leisure and work, perhaps more importantly, human contact that I really enjoy. Peggie, I was wondering if you could come in and kind of just tell me a bit more about the data surrounding maybe working from home and the offices since lockdown, the data that you've probably seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess for a bit of context, what Leesman has been doing for the past 10, 11 years almost already is measure the experience that people have with their office environments. And up until end of last year, we've collected more than 800,000 responses on a completely standardized online survey that measures how you experience your office. Now, when COVID hit, naturally people started working from home, and organizations needed a way to understand, is that working for them? So we rapidly developed a new set of questions that measures the home experience and that are very much aligned with our office experience questions as well, so that we can do some very interesting comparisons. And up until the end of last year, we had collected now about 160,000 responses to those new questions. And in a nutshell, what I can say about working from home is that on average, it has been working pretty well. So the average experience of working from home is, I would say, better than the average experience working in an average office. However, that doesn't mean it works for everyone. And it doesn't mean that it works for everything. So, for example, we're seeing that more than 20%, so more than 1 out of 5 employees actually report quite a poor experience working from home. And we also see that certain things like feeling connected to your colleagues, feeling connected to your organization are things that kind of generally is a lot more challenged when you're working from home. So I think if we think about the question that you had, who is the workplace for? I think it's like naturally it is for the employees, but it's probably going to be for different employees in different capacities and for different purposes, depending on kind of also what their alternative is and what their experience is for.
I suppose it's what we should have the office for. Is it that social element? Is it the culture, the connection, and the user and employee experience really that we want? I suppose. And Freddie, from your point of view, what have you learned from your office, from your kind of clients, and what have they said? Maybe from a TX and a Savvy point of view, related around who the workplace is for.
I think what's really interesting, and I'd love to know more about the demographic shift and feedback on the utilization of it. Because I think when people have the space, they're fortunate enough to have the space, not in shared accommodation, that they tend to enjoy working from home because they can do it. And whether it's childcare issues or just general connectivity in space, we've certainly seen that there's a sentiment for some people that they're very happy with the home working situation, especially those who have maybe live out of town and got more space. But for the younger generations that are in flat shares that are all working on their desks together, they're the ones that are finding, they're really pushing to come back to the office, and that's probably, and going out and socializing and all of the positive things that come with it. That's really the demographics have been the interesting side of the feedback of what a lot of people have been doing. From a data collection side, I mean, it comes as no great shock that the numbers we're getting of people counting in and out of offices has been really, really down, undoubtedly so. But actually, it then now, when you look sector by sector, the approach and ourselves as a construction business, or putting ourselves in a construction business, we're using the office a lot. It's part and parcel of what we do every day. So having Zoom calls with clients about moving to their new office and you're working at home is quite a difficult conversation to have. So, in buildings where you've got a multitude of occupiers, it's definitely almost sector by sector their approach to, I suppose, risk, but also reward of utilising the office. And there has definitely been some trends that have come out of it.
Aida, I suppose who the workplace is for, and from your point of view, with your 10 parameters, creating a healthy office. I mean, is the healthy workplace, in my eyes, is related to a satisfied workforce, and the gains from being in a bad office to a good office. What do you see from the data maybe that you've collected, or from your business point of view?
What we have from our point of view, which is really the quality of the environment, the working environment, is that although buildings are empty right now, maybe there's 20-30% people there, companies are really preparing to have healthier offices. So they work a lot, facility management companies work a lot to prepare the office to get back employees there. And what is really interesting is that we feel when we question our clients and their employees, we really feel that people now are really more informed, thanks to association like ASHRAE, RIVA, or even standard like Well Building Standard. They've done a pretty good job on informing and publishing guidelines on how a healthy workspace should be. So people, for example, for air quality, we have learned a lot about how we should ventilate our building and how we should improve air renewal. So people are aware really that air quality, especially lack of air quality, is really an invisible killer.
How far are we away from having most of the buildings in inner cities having a better air quality, I suppose? What's needed at the moment? Is there a specific technology that needs to come in immediately, or is it a case of redesigning? So it's really helping the workplace get better.
The first thing is really to tackle the ventilation system. You really have to increase the fresh air, the amount of fresh air in your building. So the air renewal rate has to be increased, and you have really to make to bring much more fresh air, to stop the air recycling. And if you can, but it's not easy, you can work on the air filtration, but not all building can do that because it's quite complex, and you have a pressure drop to tackle, so it's complex. Most of the time people just open windows or increase their air renewal rates.
Okay. And Zain, if I bring you in on this question as well, I mean, what's your view on the workplace at the moment in terms of the technologies that have enhanced the office experience and for the future of the office workplace? Around maybe the dreaded commute that we talked about earlier before Christmas, I suppose. How can we reconstruct the workplace, and what are the gains from being in that office environment for you?
Yeah, I think you need to appreciate where consumers are today or employees are today. Prior to the pandemic, you had to brave in California the 101, which is constantly packed, or if you're in London, right, public transport. And that commute is such a major factor for employee unhappiness. Then you've got the fact that you have to physically get into the office and you're surrounded by people, and it's very hard to concentrate at times, especially if you're in an environment that can be loud. Or some people might dislike the quality of the office, especially if you're a smaller company. I remember, like I said, my first office, eventually was flooded. It was a terrible place, right? So if that was the status quo before, and now people are at home with their family, they can work outdoors on your own schedule. You can technically multitask. No one's hovering over your back, and you get to choose when you work and ultimately where you can live. There's a lot you need to do to convince people to go back to the general workforce. And I think Aida hit it on the head. This pandemic has taught us the importance of sustainability and health. And if we're going to try to entice people back to the office, the nature of office has to change. It has to be a place where employees can, if they're willing to give up some of the benefits of working from home, the office better have more amenities. The office better be an environment where it can replicate some of the benefits. So I think a more greener shift is what I'm seeing as a trend. Yeah, I suppose the workplace is not really about the one place you go every day. It could be anywhere, a park bench or a restaurant for entrepreneurs. I mean, for me, I'd like to think I'm quite old school, but I like going to the office because I like the people within our small team here, but I suppose not every day. Ben, what about yourself? I mean, everyone talks about the assets, but how do you work with the leadership? Because I know when we talked, you were quite keen on that leadership. How do you have that whole holistic view of connecting the HR teams to the business leaders within that function?
I think this question around what the office is for has been around for a long time. Really, it's about the purpose of the office.
Yeah.
And it's not just COVID, as we know. COVID has accelerated this. We were trying to thinking, we might convince businesses to think about alternative ways of working over a sort of a 5-year period, and we managed to do that in sort of 3 months. So technology has fundamentally changed the way that we work. And as you say, the workplace is far more than the office. It's a whole hybrid of locations. But when I'm working with our clients, I think you've got to, we've been saying this on the call as well. You've got to, one size doesn't fit all. And there are some people that do need to do focus working in the office. They may still need to do that 9 to 5 if they're, sharing bed sits with 3 of their friends. So we mustn't sort of avoid that. And you say, you think about that, overlook it, simplify it. But I think what we've learned, this whole sort of drive to get into the office initially, and as Zain said, panics around, getting up on that high street between, San Jose and San Francisco. I've been up there a few times myself on visits. And also kind of public transport issues. So people were then, panicking around how to get in. So I think what we also have learned, though, is around human communities. So we've all missed that kind of connectivity with people. So, the office really represents kind of that. And, with the sustainability and ESG priorities that, we quite rightly have, wellness, mental health become a big issue for us too. The other thing I'd throw into the table is, the CFO perspective. Real estate is simultaneously an asset and a liability. And when it's vacant, it's just a liability. So there's been a real focus this year around the cost of real estate and actually how we get the benefit of that at a time when CFOs want to put their available capital probably into their supply chains and their product delivery. And some of them are questioning why we should now do huge investment in real estate that actually isn't being used. And if we're going to do too extreme, it's not been needed, right? So I think having spent 5 years trying to get people onto our conversation, maybe sometimes they've gone too far the other way. We need to bring people back, because my view is the office is definitely here to stay.
Yes.
But as we've said, the experience that office provides is very different. And I think, my talking to corporate occupiers, in almost every case, the two top priorities they have is talent and how we use the office to, attract and retain talent, improve its performance and support, mental health and well-being, which is really important. And the other one you've mentioned really is around the environment. Is how we incorporate that stuff into it. But I think the way we'll think about that is different. Example, in the past, we were putting greenery. It'd be interesting to have, Aida's view on this into offices. But actually, is that the solution? Or do we actually look at HR policies and give people the day off? Tell them to go to the park, right? Yeah. Do you even need to go to the office at all? So I think the concept of what we mean by environmental in physical buildings in the context of workplaces, as you say, is not just about the office, gives us a different perspective on how we support our employees and what we provide for them. And it may not just be the office, but as I say, office is definitely here to stay.
Definitely. Aida, what do you have to say about sort of that, what Ben was talking about around, do you kind of prescribe green days, to call it green day maybe, or what would you see in certainly in France, what you're doing with your technology there?
Actually, what I can say is that what we have observed a strong trend since a few years now, but which has accelerated last year, is the fact that companies here in France are really creating an environmental aware culture. Suddenly we realized that our world was in danger because of the damage we did. And so the focus now really is on how companies are going to mitigate their environmental impacts. Okay. What matters now is to know which companies are taking this seriously and how far they are from this reality.
You're going to be wanting to target the big companies, but how does that work from the smaller companies that have maybe 5 or 6 people in an office, to really impact on their lives as well?
Right now, the main focus is really on health on people. So, of course, the environmental comes after, but the health of keep people safe for small companies. But for large companies, for example, in France, the government to define an action plan for business growth and transformation, which helps to redefine what they call the raison d'être, which is the purpose of the company. And it means to strengthen the consideration of social and environmental issues related to their activities. And the civil code has been amended just to reflect this notion. So companies can be sued if they don't respect this raison d'être, this purpose. So it means that this is one way that the office culture is changing, because it has really to be infused with purpose.
Yeah, perfect. Ben, when we talked as well, you were saying about sort of, I suppose, different geographies being a major big player now with CBRE. how do you get the company operating the same way across different geographies for how they physically get people to be in the office, and what are the physical gains for them across, France, the UK, Mexico, US? Because it's different, but it's so different.
I mean, to me, it's not ironic. It's not about per se getting people into an office.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting people to many of us got up in the morning, got showered, got dressed, got in a car, got on public transport, went to an office, and you were sat there at your desk, and then you thought, what shall I do today?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about changing people's attitudes and being more intentional about why they need to collaborate and where they need to collaborate and when they don't need to collaborate. So if and it's about thinking about today and next Wednesday, next week, and in the following months, what you need to do and where you need to do it from. And if you think, well, tomorrow I'm going to collaborate with my colleagues in California, I don't need to go to the London office for that.
Yeah.
But if I am going to collaborate with my colleagues in London, not only do I need to go to the office, but they need to go to the office too. Mm-hmm. So suddenly we need to think about being intentional and collaborative. And this is where the technology comes in, because what's going to happen is we're all talking around the offices are going to become far less focus work. And as I say, you're still going to need that too, but it's going to be far more collaborative. But what do we mean by collaboration? Because if I'm collaborating with 6 people in different geographies, this is better because we all get a square each. Mm-hmm. And that's where equity comes in. Yeah, and actually, if I have 6 people in the London office and 3 dotted around, it's not equitable, because basically, you're having that conversation in London, people don't feel involved. So let's not kid ourselves into all collaboration needs to be done physically in an office. So it's about people thinking, as I said at the beginning, that work is something you do. Really think about what that work is, and then how you need that space, to basically support what you do. And I think, like you say, yes, we'll need offices to do that, for all those reasons we've talked about on here, particularly around mental health and collaboration. And it's getting people to think this is not a real estate transformation. This is a cultural transformation. Mm-hmm. This is about rethinking how we work, how we need to work, and giving people kind of flexibility, and those policies go together.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I suppose from a prop tech point of view, Zain or Freddie, do you have any sort of points on there, on maybe how the office layout or, physical gains of being in the office, any sort of interesting insight that you've got?
Something Aida said is really key here. Companies have made a pledge to be more carbon neutral and support the environment, and they need to be held accountable. One of the key stakeholders that are able to hold these companies accountable are obviously going to be the employees. So employees now have to transparently show what they're doing when it comes to initiatives around making sure the buildings are more energy efficient, the supply chains are more ethical and green. So I'm seeing a lot of technology there, especially around air filtration and smart buildings, especially managing the energy inside of a building. And to do that, you need to understand the occupancy inside of a building.
Yeah.
And when you talk about occupancy, that takes you to another place, which is, what do we do with our offices? How do we actually use it? We have the chance now to redesign our office. So we need to do that in a data-driven way. And having things like IoT sensors allows you to, on a granular level, understand which desk is taken, which meeting room is taken, which part of your physical office is being used for amenities. And I think you're going to get more towards the model of flex space. And not just flex space as an industry jargon term, but I also mean the idea that the design configurations of offices will be flexible, adaptable, and changeable. Then I think another big trend, and I'll tell you, I have seen so many co-living startups pitch me. It seems like I'm getting 2 or 3 decks every week now. And there is a blend between where we work and where we live. And I hate to say this crudely, we think of ourselves as working from home. A lot of people now feel like they're living at work. And
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
That's a painful thing for people who aren't set up to work remotely.
I think a lot of people are. They've really realised in this pandemic that they've kind of had a patchwork. They have had to order a screen. They've had to order the hardware in. And like me, I mean, I was never set up to work from home with a 1-year-old and with no door to an office. When you're on a call and you're trying to do a webinar, so just constantly looking over my shoulder. But it's tough for a lot of people. But I think we're slowly learning.
This is
Freddie,
no different from my experience when Blackberries were invented, right? You guys probably all too young to remember this, but when the Blackberries were invented, everybody panicked because they thought they were going to be at work all the time. And I had a lot of colleagues who refused to have one for quite a long time. Because now we realise it's about what you do is important, but how you do it is equally important, and it's about managing the assets you have, whether they're technology assets or physical assets, to support what you do. So we're this is going to go through all generations. There'll be something else after this. It's rethinking how you work. You're right. We're sort of essentially at work and at home all the time.
Yeah,
it's a place of creating that kind of balance and support, and this is why it's really a cultural transformation, because it's about. We're going to have to rethink leadership, because you're going to have strong leaders who lead globally and remotely. And a lot of people have never really experienced that kind of approach. We're going to have policies which, allow people to have 3 hours off in the middle of the day to collect their kids from school or walk the dog. We're going to have to think this, but then Aida will be able to support this. I worked for a long time at a German bank, and France is similar from that perspective. Workers' council issues. You can't turn around to the people, I'm sure, in France and say, take that 3 hours off in the day, but I expect you to be on the call at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. You're going to have different issues with that. In the US, if you're working in one state and, as you all know, Zain, and living in another state, you've got tax issues. So we've got to have all these kind of considerations around it. And I think the legislation and stuff is not obviously caught up to this yet, but we've got to rethink the whole working environment, because we are essentially at work and at home all the time. And we've got to work out the policies and processes to support that.
That's true. And Freddie, from the occupancy side, just following on from what Zain was saying and Ben was saying there, given the fact that what Savvy do and also from the TX side, how have you seen any sort of trends there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both points are incredibly valid, and exactly, I can't say them more succinctly than you have. I think the one thing that we've definitely seen is that when it comes to collecting data and gathering data, sometimes it can be so much data and so many options, so many sensors, so many things. It's really hard to know where to start. And there's definitely this balance we've seen, is that we sit between the landlord and tenant. And, where does that accountability land? As a business, you can ask for the data on how energy efficient your building is. You can choose a building that's more energy efficient. But when you design and occupy that building, the accountability then falls into the business responsibility. So now we need to put our own sensors up. We need to educate staff on what those sensors mean. We want to know that we're tracking you and how your desk occupancy is, because there's all too many things out there in the press where they haven't told the staff that, oh yes, that thing under your desk is letting us know if you're here or not. And does that encourage or actually discourage people to come to it and to the office space? I certainly think that there's always the starting place of doing something as opposed to nothing. And a lot of people tend to be slightly overwhelmed by choice of, do we start with Bluetooth? Do we start with this? Do we start with that? And, for me, I've always thought access control, the key fobs we use every day to get into buildings is such a simple way of, it's an unsustainable piece of plastic that we lose thousands of every year in every single building, yet we just keep churning them out. And why don't we use our phones to get into buildings? And there's lots of issues around that. But for me, it's really simple things that we've seen that you can sometimes get paralyzed by choice, and actually the best thing you can do is just to start collecting data. And exactly as Zain said, is that if you want to make an informed decision backed by data, you need to start collecting it, and start somewhere, start with something, and then you can start to look at those trends over time. And I think a lot of problems is that, especially in the UK, a lot of the London stock isn't susceptible to becoming smart, and retrospectively making a listed building gather data is expensive, it is difficult, it's time consuming, and also who pays for it, and the accountability is often a big challenge. And it's not something that is an easy silver bullet, but it's something that I think that this is really accelerated, and that everyone wants to pick up the mantle as opposed to saying it's not my problem. So we're definitely seeing a trend in people wanting to know more about it, but it's still trying to get to the bottom of whose problem and what's the biggest.
Sure. Well, in terms of the second point, I mean, the redesigning the workplace and to support the organisational priorities. So that's a great segue into sort of using the smart data for the office utilisation. I mean, Peggie, was there any sort of analysis that you have that supports a viable return to an office environment that you've perhaps collected, maybe on some of the papers that you've written? I mean,
does age make a difference in who is coming back to the office or who's not coming back to the office?
Yeah, so that's certainly something that we've looked at both back before COVID. We looked at how do different age groups and experience the office environments, and now then how do the different demographics experience working from home, and what we've seen before in offices, actually contrary to kind of the general belief where the Generation X and the millennials are quite often portrayed as being the really demanding ones who are, it's very challenging to meet their needs. They are actually the ones that consistently have the best experience of the office, and how the reason for that, really, what our data shows is that, if you're young, you're in the beginning of your career, you're likely to not have as much responsibility just yet, and you do less different things. That also means that what you need from the infrastructure may be less than what your slightly older colleague needs, who does a lot more different types of things. And as a consequence, what we find consistently, the younger employees are the ones who have a better experience of the office. It does what they need it to do for them. Now, if we then look at the data on working from home, we've got kind of the same thing there, where because the younger employees, they have basically lower requirements, lower demands, that basically kind of brings their experience from working from home upwards. However, as was mentioned previously on this call, if you're flat sharing or house sharing, and you've got two housemates who you're competing about with, who gets the dining table this morning, that actually brings the experience down. And actually, what sort of setting you have available to you at home is basically the strongest driver of your home working experience, as I believe, Freddie, you were guessing earlier on. So as a consequence, actually, when we look at the home working data, there's not a clear pattern there that the younger employees would have a much worse or much better experience. It's kind of evened out by older employees are more likely to have a better setting, but they also have higher requirements. And the younger employees perhaps have a poorer setting, but their requirements are lower. So yeah, quite interesting and surprising data, to be honest.
Yeah, but I suppose from the younger point of view, a grad, it will change the way they're going to be working. So, and they obviously need to, I suppose, have that osmosis from senior colleagues. They need to have that contact. So it's incredibly important for them, I suppose, to come in. I mean, I suppose, Ben, from your point of view, given the fact you're a leader within CBRE's function there, and how do you change opinions of HR and others in the business from your views that you've got on it, and how would we work together to utilize that data from a broking side?
It's what I call a sort of engage, educate, empower. So it's not kind of convincing people to change their minds. I think what it is engagement, is getting everyone involved in the conversation, not just senior leaders. Quite often in real estate change programs, you go to senior leaders, you get a budget and you deliver what they say, and you inform the employees somewhere along the way. This is, it's affecting, as we've heard, generations in lots of different ways. I'm of the older generation, but then we have, school-age children to manage and all these issues. But my son has just left university, starting his first job remotely and not connecting with people. So I'm feeling all of this stuff from all the generations. And so I think that kind of engaging people is the important thing. Is we hear, make decisions off data, improve communication by getting the whole firms, communities involved in this conversation. Run workshops. Don't assume. Ask people. Ask the different countries. They have different, things. People who are on public transport or not on public transport. There's lots of issues. I think there's an education process. This has become a subjective conversation, right? Because we've all worked at home, so we all think we know how it works now. But actually, all we know is our own personal experiences. So have those conversations, and I think the education phase around that is to really listen to how it works. One of the things I specifically get involved in the capital markets part of this is how we're actually going to physically change all this. Because what this boils down to is we're going to need different types of space in different locations. We're going to need less in some areas, more in some areas. And what it means is a whole transformation of the real estate portfolio. And for those involved in the process, real estate disposition of, either, from a freehold perspective, doing sale and leasebacks and monetizing the product, or whether it's basically, leases and we're doing surrenders and sublets and assignments, is a complicated business. Mm-hmm. So I think people need to understand that, and we can't just assume it's about delivering nice offices and getting it all done like, in a few months' time. It's a complex process, so we need to educate people and take it through. Unfortunately, moving real estate is like shifting oil tankers, so it's something to do. And the other part of that is to empower them. Then you empower people to really, it's back to our cultural question we haven't really touched on yet, but it's about, culture is not a single event. It's a series of connections between people. And it's really, the powerful cultures are going to be ones that provide people with choice and diversity and agility, and support kind of socialization and communication, learning, productivity. This is what's going to differentiate cultures. And it's like table stakes. If corporates don't, and occupiers are talking to me about this, if they don't change their workplaces to support that stuff, and their competitors do, this is going to be a serious problem for them. So I think this is a cultural change with real estate right at the center of it. But don't underestimate, the capital markets, financial complexity of actually the question we haven't touched is how you actually get this done.
Yeah, that's a key one, I suppose. I suppose involving maybe Aida's Green Me and various other people's, like Freddie's Savvy company as well, to really redesign the way it will look and the way it will feel. Because I suppose employers are rushing to kind of lure health conscious millennials back, as well as getting everyone back, as well as the millennials, the fresh air, daylight, plant filled spaces, everything like that. And I suppose a healthy workplace, in my eyes, is a key to a satisfied staff, which I'm sure, Aida, you would agree with that by saying that it probably is within that space.
Yeah, completely. Thanks to technology right now, we are able to be more aware of how the building behaves and what are the conditions in which we spend most of our day, our days. So buildings are becoming more efficient, and they are providing more information on how the lighting is, how the noise, everything, how the working conditions are, and companies are really paying more attention to this, showing, and they want to show to their employees that they are taking care of this.
Yeah, perfect.
This is a shift that we are observing right now.
Good. Freddie, the commercial property market, of course, is in a transition with the landlords and practice seeking kind of new ways to provide a space and a service and evolve kind of as a result of that co-working phenomenon. But from your point of view, what are you seeing, and how have you kind of navigated around the question of the data and how you're using it?
Yeah, I think space as a service has been something that's been talked about in real estate for a long time. I think going back to sort of Ben's point, actually the execution of it is definitely a little bit hit and miss depending on how real estate does it. And again, going back to my earlier point of, is it the landlord, the asset, the funding, is it the facilities management team, or is it the on-site FN team? Like who does that land with? And I do think that the co-working concept and of that has been really beneficial to accelerating a lot of these considerations that need to be offered to enable them to compete with the likes of the bigger operators they are globally. I think what we're seeing from a design trend and from an occupier trend, this is, again, I would caveat it by being in central London, it's probably different globally from especially the Peggie's leasing surveys and from different businesses. But the sentiment we're seeing is that actually there's a shift away from this high density communal space operations as a business to be comfortable with sharing your coffee station with 50, 60 strangers, unsurprisingly, with everything that's going on with the pandemic. And there definitely seems to be a shift back towards the more traditional of having your own front door and having more control over your own space. But I do think there's definitely, touching on what Aida was saying, I think there's definitely this opportunity now to educate people that there are things called healthy, sustainable buildings, and they don't need to be tied up in acronyms that people don't understand. They can be in a digestible format that people can understand, and then they can gravitate towards them. And I do think that's something that, the sustainability credentials and saying buildings BREEAM is great if you understand what BREEAM is and how it works. But for your graduate or for a senior director that's never seen it, it's something that the questions that we in real estate talk about a lot. And I think space as a service and co-working businesses got really right in delivering that as a sales sort of B2C format. I think we're getting better at understanding that real estate isn't always B2B, it can also be B2C as far as a sales strategy. So I think in answer to your question is that I think there's definitely a shift towards it. I think it's changed a lot in the last 12 months in the UK and London. And I'd be really interested to know what, everyone else's opinion is on how that sentiment is across the world, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Zain, from your point of view in the US, across the ponds, things that we obviously speak similar languages, but apart from that, I mean, real estate is, I feel in the prop tech side and the different from different states, it's far more advanced than what we have here. What's your view on that?
Well, look, it's been decimated in the area we're in because San Francisco, behind me, right, is a place where tech companies occupy most of the commercial office buildings and are a large employer. These are the very companies that are most adaptable and are able to go remote. So places like San Francisco have been hit hard, especially on the commercial office market, because we also have investments in that space. So it does vary state by state for sure, even country by country. I think something I want to touch on that Ben said that struck something within me, and it was a good thing or a bad thing. When I was a CEO, we had 8 offices around the world, and I couldn't agree more about creating buy-in. But the thing is, when you go around to your different offices that aren't HQ, everyone wants to be like HQ, and everyone's sort of upset that the perks and amenities that HQ has, they don't have locally. I found it somewhat like how it is with my kids. I got a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. And if I buy my 7-year-old something and my 5-year-old something, rather than being pleased, Daddy, it's not fair. Why did she get this? And hey, that's not fair. Why did he get that? It really sometimes feels like it backfires when you try to implement perks in your office. If you don't communicate it, if you don't create buy-in, it just creates more disconnect. It actually creates a cultural division between your different offices, which is something I experienced a lot. So just wanted to point that out because that was something Fred said that struck something within me. Another thing I'd say that as a prop tech VC, I see a lot of trends. There's one trend that people aren't talking about, and that's this new rise of a workforce, which is basically freelancers. Last year, almost $1 trillion was earned in the US by freelancers. These are the people that are going to be, firstly, earning significantly more, as we say here, than what you would in your W-2 income or your, taxable income. These are the people that are most likely to adopt the co-living, co-working environments. And I think that's a big trend that's going to be disruptive for sure when it comes to the future of work.
I suppose, Ben, when we talked on the phone before Christmas, I mean, you talked about with me the pent-up demand and how we bring about a change of the culture. But it's really about what change is required from the 2020 conversation. Now we're in 2021. That conversation of hybrid working and the pent-up demand that you've seen from the economic point of view, relating to culture, relating to how work is done now.
Probably can't cover it justice here right now. But as I said already, I think, culture, as I said, is about a series of connected interactions with people. And I think that's what's changing because technology is changing that, location's changing that. And as I said, I'm not, I don't have the answers, but I think there are things we should think about. Like I said, yes, we need to provide, as I said, wellness and relaxation time for our people. But the question is, do we have to do that in physical offices or are there different ways of doing it? It's kind of thinking about the totality. We've always said we're working 24/7 and living 24/7 in the same place. So we need to think around HR policies and the physical environment is part of that as well. So, one of the things we've looked at before with occupiers is to think of the office in terms of that experience. So as other physical assets, and some of the key experiences you will want from your office is collaboration. What does that mean for you? And what kind of physical space do you need to support that kind of collaboration? There's different kinds. Collaboration could be me and Zain talking, across the pond. That's collaboration. And the way we do that is very different than if, 7 people in a physical geographical location. We still need individual focus working, the second experience. Again, let's not forget that we're going to need that. People are going to still need quiet time. So you're going to have different kinds of office. That maybe you want to book that space, collaboration. Do you want to book the space or do you want to put the meeting through something like, Teams, and let the technology select the right space for you, right? So that's one of the things, and that kind of thing, think about, because that can reduce the amount of meeting rooms you need if you're using them more efficiently using technology. And by the way, the technology can tell us that it's clean before we use it as well. So there's kind of things like that. The other ones which you've touched on really is corporate identity, cultural identity. And we used to call this entering the office, or for obvious reasons, we've changed the process on that, because entering the office gives you some kind of, when you walk into your physical office, you want to feel that you're part of that kind of culture of that corporate. So if you walk into a television company, or if you walk into a bank, you want to feel that it's different. But now you're not actually physically going in, but you still need to generate that kind of cultural identity. So there's a big question around that, and it goes through, remote leadership. There's a whole conversation around, the fourth one is amenities, of how you put that in a building. And I've touched on some of that. We need to question, do you really need table tennis tables and gyms in your office now? Or
Absolutely.
Just don't go to the office?
Table tennis table.
But then don't go to the office,
Yeah.
But then, if you want to collaborate with people at work, maybe you do. So again, I'm not saying it's, there's answers, there's just things to think about. Traditionally, we were putting that stuff in offices, and I'm thinking, really, do I really need that? Or do I just give people more flexible ways of working in their time? And the critical one we haven't really talked a lot about is connectivity of the building. And I'm talking about connectivity between people, that's collaboration, but connecting the building. So, workplace technology is going to be, a prerequisite now of the way we do things. And I think looking at, Freddie mentioned around the investor side, I do think offices are here to say, I don't think investors need to worry too much around their core and prime assets, but what they do need to think about is quality. And they need to think of real conversations with occupiers around what occupiers want. And I think there will be a flight to quality. And, I think, London office is obviously, prime for that, and other major cities. But that's something over time. And to get that right, to think, what is it that's going to attract and retain talent in offices, and making sure we get that right, ESG concerns and everything else. That to me is a big issue.
Sure. Peggie, if I may bring you in on this, I mean, the insights you have on getting people back to the office around the culture and what your data is saying, I suppose the physical manifestation of the organisation, what they may be missing out on, and really how is that relating to, I suppose, the quality of an office, like what Ben was saying, compared to bad offices, and who's going into it. I wonder if you had anything on that point of view.
Yeah, I guess first of all, I totally agree that the office, I mean, it is the physical manifestation of the organization, and I think if an organization were to consider, well, we don't really need the offices, it is a massive lost opportunity to really have something that the employees feel connected to. And I mean, some of the organizations that where we measure their offices, they have nearly 100% of their employees say that their workplace is a place they're proud of. And to miss out on things like that, and we have organizations where every single employee says that this supports informal social interaction and so forth. So it's a huge thing to miss out on. But then talking about bringing people back, and will people want to be back, and how much do they want to be back, which I guess leads into the, on one hand, how much space do you need in the future? Kind of perversely, I would say the poorer the quality of your space, the less you'll need of it. And the opposite, the better quality space you provide, the more you'll need of it, because the more employees will actually want to be there. And this is something that we've seen very, very clearly. We have quite a lot of our clients add an additional question to our standardized survey, where they ask how many days a week do you want to work from home going forward? And I'd say kind of generally on average, 2 to 3 days seems to be the most popular answer. But then when we cut it based on what's the experience that people have in the office, we see a very clear pattern. We did this for one of our clients, where one of their offices that provided a really outstanding experience, 90% of the employees wanted to work from home maximum 1 day a week. And then we looked at a couple of other buildings as well, a couple of other offices as well. And the office with the poorest experience in the office, there basically most people wanted to work at least 2, 3, 4, even 5 days a week from home. So it's really about, if you want to bring your people together and want to bring them back into the office to some extent, then you need to have a good quality office, and that will bring them back. But as I said, you know, the better of an office you provide, it kind of means that the more you're going to need of it. Especially in energy efficiency, you know, the European regulation is getting stricter regarding the building energy efficiency. So company really will have to have high targets to attain, considering the reduction of energy consumption of that building. So what will happen is that this will impact comfort inside the building. So this is a real issue, because when you will ask people to get back to the office, you will ask as well, you have to ask as well to take care of their behavior inside the building concerning the energy consumption. For example, take the stairs, not the lift, etc. So this is really have to be prepared for companies to really construct a strategy so that people are aware that they will have constraints.
Yes.
Their comfort will be impacted by this regulation.
I see, and clearly now with the UK being out of the EU, it was going to be so different here as well. You know, God knows what's going to happen there. But I suppose how much and where space is required, you know, will kind of the office locations change, and how will they be used to attract talent? It's really about giving employees the choice, and well, actually, I think it's starting off by thinking about how can we maximize the employee experience, and I think one of the key things there is really to give employees the choice of where they want to work. Is it in the office? Is it at home? Is it the third spaces? And also remembering, I mean, because we talk a lot about, you know, perhaps what the forerunner organizations are doing, or what is the art of the possible. But sometimes we may forget perhaps the organizations that are more traditional, and there's a whole lot of those out there as well. And I do hear about organizations who are saying, basically, when COVID is over, we're going back to the way it was before. And I think that is a huge risk for those organizations that they need to think about, because you can't really go back to the way it was before, because in that case, you're not going back, you're going backwards, because employees' expectations have increased tremendously. We've now all seen that home working or remote working does work for most of us. So for any organization to go back and then say, you know what, it's, you know, COVID is gone, we can all go back to the office, you're not allowed to work remotely anymore, that it shouldn't be an option for any organization. So I think really it is about giving the choice of which locations, whether it is, you know, going all the way downtown to the office or working somewhere more local in a third space. You had maybe a slide that kind of illustrated something around the LMI scale, if you know, of a good office to a bad office, and what that kind of looked like. And happy to show it. It's kind of what I previously explained around. But let's have a look. If I'm able to share my screen, I'm happy to show it, just because it is quite quite eye-opening data. So when we are talking about where do people want to work in the future, I mentioned that some organizations add an additional question to our survey, where they ask, well, how many days do you want to work from home in the future? And they would have response options along the lines of this. And this is an example from one particular organization case where we looked at 3 of their different offices, where building number 1, the LMI stands for the overall experience score, and an LMI of 79.3 means it's outstanding. And an LMI of 55.7, it does mean that the employee experience in that office is not particularly good. And here then, when we see, well, how much do people actually want to work from home going forward? I mean, the pattern couldn't be more clear, where you see that the first building there, way more than 90% actually would want to work from home maximum 1 day a week, and compare that to building number 3 at the bottom.
So it's really about, providing your employees with with the choice, because if you're not able to provide them with a good office workplace, then you can't expect them to want to come in there. And also, it's perhaps good that they don't want to come in there, because if you have an office that does not provide the facilities and what they need, then they're not going to be productive. They're not going to feel engaged. They're not going to feel healthy, and they're not going to be able to do what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, clearly, if you've got a good office, people are going to want to go to it. If you build it, people will come, right? Zain, when we spoke, you kind of grabbed my attention by talking about prefab modular tech doing fairly well in the space, and I suppose it's how you use the space. Keen to sort of expand a little bit more on that, because if you're building it, people will come.
I think when we're having this discussion about where we want to go, we really have to appreciate where we were and understand the biases we have because of where we are right now.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at history, we have seen a densification trend where we've started to cram more and more people into smaller and smaller spaces. COVID is obviously going to result in a reversal of this densification trend with more amenities and, more sunlight, meditation rooms, more open spaces. But we've got to appreciate where we are right now, especially when we look at all these surveys and reports and you ask people what they want. Where we are right now is not working from home. This is lockdown, right? Let me make that very clear. When people think about working from home, you think about chilling out in your home with your laptop, going out to a coffee shop, maybe working there, spending a couple of hours with friends, traveling to see family. None of that is possible. So I can appreciate why people are frustrated working from home, because home is not really what it feels like. You've got kids to take care of if you don't have if they're not going to school or whatever. So I think there is a bias we all need to appreciate. I think that's my key points to Rothe.
Ben, on your point of view, the hub and spoke model, if there's anything there in terms of what we discussed on the phone, how much and where the space is required.
Sure. I can't believe we've talked for nearly an hour and I haven't mentioned the word hybrid, so I'm going to mention it. I absolutely agree with Peggie. I think it's, as we've said, it's the cultural question has to come first. And we've been saying all through the pandemic, a lot of people say, we don't know what the future of the workplace is going to be. We know exactly what the future of the workplace is going to be. It's going to be hybrid.
Yeah,
it's going to be hybrid for everybody. The question is, what does that mean for each organization? When I talk to corporates, I talk about the 3 A's, and the 3 A's are activity, assets, and access.
Okay.
It's really important that they all look at those in those orders. So the first question that corporates want to talk about the real estate and the space and the costs and all the physical assets and technology first. But where they really need to start is activity. What exactly do you do? And really understand that and have a serious question and conversation with each of the businesses around what activities, what roles have to be dependent on a physical building. And when you ask this question, as we do, you get a very high proportion of people saying they have to be in the office. And when you question it, you realize they don't really. And I think the obvious ones are things that are physically connected to buildings, like, security guards or receptionists and stuff that we can go through. But each business has got, certain roles that they would prefer not to be done, on people's dining room tables. Whether, the banks have those, and certainly, in the education company that I worked for before, we didn't want examinations marked and then written on people's dining room tables. So every corporate will have those kind of functions to identify that activity. The assets you then need to do that, and the location how you access them is either the technology assets or the physical assets. And that is, which geographies you need to be in, which cities, and even within a city, is that the office, is that work near home, and how you access that physical space or technology space. We've talked about workplace technology to, book meeting rooms or to book space or hot desks or wherever you need. But I think it comes into the kind of work near home solution. We've talked about, offices of demand and surface that as well. So it's going to be, these are all options. And what corporates need to look at is saying, not rethink the traditional, everybody gets in the morning and goes to, the central office and everybody has a desk and there are a few meeting rooms. We've got to rethink, as I say, the assets and how we access to support them. And what that leads on to as well with the conversation, again, I bang on a lot about how we implement this stuff. It does boil down to, as I say, less space in some areas, more in others, and changing it. The problem we've got, or something with challenge we have that we have to face, is excess office supply, which there will be in areas around, traditionally has been put back into the office sector. In other words, we sublet to other companies who basically want our space. If every single corporate is basically looking to downsize and rationalize and change, that's not going to be, that's not going to work. So we need to look at things like the retail sector, where obviously retail has changed, and that's been picked up by logistics and the changes going on in that space. And we need to think about this in the office sector and say, where is that surplus going to go? So we need to have a conversation across the asset classes. We talked about some of them: co-living, residential, the logistics could pick, what about, sort of the local warehousing, because that kind of distribution stuff that's going on. And I think there's a whole kind of data centers is another option. We've got to have a think about where this excess supply is going to go. And I think connecting that ecosystem, as I said, not just internally, we've talked about, HR, finance, but also across the investors. So a big conversation with investors and owners, with occupiers, having more of a grown-up and connected conversation around where, the mutual benefits are. And I think there's great opportunity for
you're probably your old leasing hat on. I suppose you probably have much to agree with there, but I suppose you've got a perfect blend of experience around all of those points.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think the grey space is definitely a huge challenge of, as you say, Ben, if everyone's releasing space, who's taking it? And I think there's the way in which, I suppose, both the planning and also the legal structure of many leases mean that actually the concept of why don't we just sublet one floor and run it as a serviced office and have loads of different people in here? It's like, well, actually, no, is it secure? Can they get access? Where's my, is my comms room? Are they going to walk up and find confidential information? No, we can't do that. And then getting into the marketing perspective of, why don't we run dark kitchens? What a great concept. It'd be fantastic. We have last mile logistics coming in and out. And then you talk to an owner of a building that has, say, last mile logistics, and they've got 20 vans parked outside and 30 mopeds at the front, and you're trying to rent premium office space next to it. Data centers from a sustainability perspective, a power consumption perspective, are massive. That's why they are where they are. And I mean, one thing I'm very keen to see is that can we convert some of these office and retail spaces into, a sustainable food, actual growth? Like, can we grow food inside? Can we use these spaces for other more sustainable reasons? And don't even get me started on the why we build Cat A versus shell and floor. We work a lot in design and build and Cat B, and when you see a 3-week-old ceiling tile be taken out and put in a skip because you're taking, there's huge amounts of things like that I think are going to be challenging. But I think, in answer to your actual question, is in the mixture of how we can look at these buildings will require a change in understanding, a change in marketing, a change in how people value them and what you can attribute to them. And I do think it's definitely one of the best things. And as Peggie said, you can't go backwards, you can only go forwards. And these things haven't been done before. And it will be the brave people and the brave funds that do push it out there and do collaborate and do have a dark kitchen with affordable office space next to a data center with co-living in part of the building, and that hopefully will be the new mixed use asset of the future, in my opinion, with a lovely API sat at the bottom of it, making sure it's all working efficiently for the next one. So every building can be a prototype for a better one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, thanks very much to all the panelists. I mean, I was wondering if there's any other closing remarks that anyone had, that any points were not discussed.
I just want to say one thing, is that all the discussion we had is about really a human being and the human factor. And there's one pitfall, and there's a trend that we are observing, which is not the right one, really, is that we rely too much on technology. And for example, you can put as much as air ventilation, air filtration, disinfection in a building. If people don't wear a mask, it's useless, right? So you really have to take into account the human factor, whatever you do in your office, in your workplace. Whether you're redesigning it or you're thinking about how you can make it more sustainable. Really have to focus on the human being. And this is where we need just to think that technology doesn't do everything.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and I think you're spot on there. I mean, as a prop tech VC myself, I want to see a lot of technology adoption, but it comes with implementation headaches. You're literally, with implementing technology, especially workplace occupancy analytics, you've got to think about how you change employee behavior. And it can easily be abused. I've seen meeting room systems where, one tenant in a co-working space might book every conference room for the whole entire year. I've literally seen that happen, right? On the other hand, I've seen employees who might not want to use the sensor. They feel it's an invasive, something on their desk, for example. They just want to do things the old way. I'm sure you've seen too cases where someone doesn't use a meeting booking system correctly and just causes havoc throughout the whole office. The last thing I'd say is, and I don't think any VC is talking about this, all this technology is awesome, okay? But IoT devices are built to be lightweight. And one of the things that they come with is some serious security issues at times. There are some serious cybersecurity things to be thinking about as occupiers start to think about implementing sensors and analytics in their buildings. When there's a data breach, the consequences are just, terrible. And I think European regulation especially is not very, doesn't look well upon breaches and consumer data violations.
That's interesting point. Interesting point.
So you say as a final thought, I think we've all learned a huge amount in 2020 about a lot of things, around what works and doesn't work, around technology, around culture, around, human interaction and various things. Hopefully in a few months, we're going to have vaccines rolled out around the world and people are going to start coming back to offices. That's the moment we need to be careful that people don't forget all the experiences we've just learned and think they're going back to as it was before. And CFOs particularly looking at, as I say, their balance sheets and looking at their capital investment and saying, actually, why am I really doing this again? Let's get back to products and supply chains and other things. I think, we all in the industry have a responsibility to sort of really act on this and move forwards. We're saying not, I think Peggie was saying, not moving, backwards. And building a new workforce and a new way of thinking and a new way of working, and we, the real estate industry provides, supports that kind of culture. I think that's going to be very important that we don't get to the second half of this year and beyond, and people have, more important priorities to spend their money on. This is really important. We need to, focus people to do it.
Well, to conclude really there, I mean, I suppose there's no really one-size-fits-all solution, I'm afraid to say. As employers around the world experiment with bringing sometimes reluctant employees back to the office, a well-planned return to the office can really use this moment to redefine their role as a place of where people should choose to come, not just to have to come. And should really create an attraction for the best talent, improve collaboration, increase productivity and an efficient cost base. Ultimately, the aim of this reinvention will be what good companies have always wanted, I suppose. A safe environment where people can enjoy their work, collaborate with their colleagues, and achieve the objectives of the organisations. Well, the answer is very difficult for every organisation across the globe, and it's going to be based on what talent is needed, which roles really benefit from being in the office, and which people really benefit from the office. How regularly is physical collaboration really required, and looking forward to where they're really the most appealing office locations are, whether it's London, whether it's New York, whether it's in the city or being outside of that. But an interesting debate. Thanks very much to all our panelists and to all of you watching. Thanks and goodbye.